If you're watching this right now, you survived the 1 week long 25% pullback in Bitcoin. Some are calling it the 1 week long bear market. That's certainly what it felt like this last weekend. We had people calling for new lows, return to 20K. The bull market's over. And just today, Bitcoin is back above 50K. It is crazy what a little 5 or 10K swing, that 10% move means for Bitcoin. It sways everyone thinking it's a bear market to everyone realizing we're still in a bull market. And on today's market update video, I want to cover one really important thing. What's driving this move? What was the biggest news event this week? It came out Monday. We're going to talk about that in a second. And also, is this move for real? Is this just a leveraged run up or is it actually healthy buying? And what do you need to be watching? The one thing I'm watching in March for Bitcoin as we move forward. There's a market update on Bitcoin on the Profit Maximalist show. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Let's get right into it after the intro.
There's only one way out from here, and that's up.
All right, guys, so first things first, before we get into the Bitcoin outlook, just want to say thank you so much for stopping by the channel. Subscribe right down here on YouTube or hit the like button if you've been enjoying these updates. You might notice I'm out of my normal studio. So I'm in a different studio this week. So if the video or the audio quality is a little bit different this week, just bear with me. We'll be back to much more frequent and the normal setting starting next week. But first, we got to talk Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin up almost 10% today at one point. It's sitting at $50,800 as I look at it right now. And the deepest we got on this pullback, which happened this weekend to start March, was right around 43,000. So Bitcoin so far during this bull run has peaked somewhere between 57K and 58K, right? And then for the past 7 or 8 days, we had this pullback, and it's a 25% pullback or a 30% pullback. And in Bitcoin, that's normal, right? And what's wild to me is over the weekend and over the past 7 days, I saw so many people saying, look, the Bitcoin bull market's over. And I made a video last week. If you've been following the show, I said, please listen to this before you say the bull market's over. If you want to watch that or listen to that episode, hit the link right above me. But basically what I covered was you have to be looking at the market structure of Bitcoin and analyzing, are we still in a bull trend on high time frames, and not be so worried about 20 to 30% pullbacks, because those just happen frequently for Bitcoin. And honestly, as I look at the market and kind of taking everything into context now that Bitcoin's had a nice bounce back, I honestly don't think the pullback was too brutal for Bitcoin. I think the reason that a lot of traders and investors felt so concerned over the past week had more to do with how far alts pulled back. Right, so altcoins pulled back somewhere in a range of 30 to 40%. Bitcoin only pulling back from that 58K. The lowest it got was 43K, and that measured move is about a 25% move. So that's honestly kind of common, right? In a Bitcoin market that does 200 to 300% almost every single year, you have 20 or 30% pullbacks. You're going to have that in an asset that's this volatile, that performs this well. We're going to overshoot sometimes, and then we have to correct. So I want to talk about this Bitcoin move. What's driving this move, right? Because that's what's important. Is this move for real? Is this a dead cat bounce? Do we head lower? All those things. That's what we're talking about in the episode today. And the biggest news that I saw come out on Monday was Michael Saylor buying more Bitcoin, right? So it was actually a small purchase. You guys are probably familiar with that name. If you're not, I don't know where you've been, but Michael Saylor is the CEO of MicroStrategy, and they were the first company to get very aggressive with corporate treasury buying for Bitcoin. And his purchase on Monday was actually a pretty small purchase relative to how much they've hold. He's actually purchased over $2 billion worth of Bitcoin just in the past 6 to 9 months. And that $2 billion of Bitcoin that he's bought is now worth $4 billion. I made a little chart to show all his buys, whether or not he's buying the dip or whether he's buying during a run-up. It really doesn't matter. What he's consistently done over the past 6 to 9 months is every couple months, he allocates a little bit more to Bitcoin. And just in a span of 6 months, being able to double his exposure, $2 billion put in, it's now worth $4 billion with an average entry right around $24,000. And one piece of news that actually might have slipped by you about that Michael Saylor purchase was he actually made one of his biggest purchases ever, and that happened right around 52K during the pullback. That was right before the weekend. So he bought $1 billion worth of Bitcoin during this pullback, bought another small allocation towards the bottom, right around 46K, and that corporate buying the dip. I know it's only MicroStrategy right now, but you have to realize this is a bigger story. There's a bigger narrative, and this is a bigger demand side of the equation than many people realize. And this is what I pointed out in last week's video, saying you have to listen to this before you say the bull market's over. MicroStrategy and Elon Musk, right? Those two are at the forefront right now. Everyone's thinking about them because they've been very public about their Bitcoin buys. But the really exciting part of that narrative of corporate treasuries adopting Bitcoin, right, is for the next 1 to 6 months, as companies go through the regulatory measures and onboard and the process in order to buy that much Bitcoin, make the decision to buy the Bitcoin and actually do it, does take 1 to 6 months.
Look, Elon had his announcement that Tesla bought Bitcoin. It takes a month, 2 months, 3 months for other investors to go through the institutional allocation process. There's a time lag. So there's this mountain of money that's still coming into this. Basically, if nothing changes, there's another $10 billion of institutional US buying going to happen over the next 6 months.
And that buyer, I do think, is going to continue to buy dips. And I also think they're going to keep the bull market alive. So that kind of built my thesis over the past couple of weeks. And that's why I wanted to release last week's video talking about the bull market not being over. So now that we've bounced back, right? Bitcoin's at 50K, 51K. Michael Saylor and corporate treasuries bought the dip. I wish someone would have told you that. Oh, wait, I did, right? So that happened. Now that we're at this level, technically, does it look good, right? Because as Bitcoin bounces in a bull market, sometimes it's just leveraged traders that are getting too aggressive. Maybe they're getting too excited about a move up, and we all know what happens when the market gets too leveraged, right? Those traders get wiped out. Sometimes it can lead to cascading liquidations, and price has to fall. But that isn't what happened. And someone who described the phenomenon, the buying pressure that happened in the past 24 hours, where Bitcoin rose 10%, you have ETH up almost 10%, Link and a lot of the other large caps all up 10 to 15%. In the past 24 hours, we're starting to really see this dip bounce. Suju characterized this, I think, perfectly. He tweeted this out yesterday, and he was looking at the Asian session buying that took place, right? So there's New York trading hours, there's Asian trading hours, and you can separate those two to kind of understand who's buying. And Suju is the CEO of Three Arrows Capital, one of the largest crypto hedge funds in the space. So whenever he's talking, it's probably a good idea to listen. And this is what he said about that Asian session for cryptocurrency trading yesterday. He tweeted out that Asian session markets today have been characterized by orderly monotonic increases on large cap crypto assets, despite muted levels of perpetual swap funding. And that's the most important part. I'm going to get back to that. This is otherwise known in the parlance of cryptocurrency trading as bullish buying. Now, obviously, the second half of that tweet is a little bit of a shitpost, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a little bit of a joke, but there is some seriousness and some truth to it as well. And what he meant by despite muted levels of perpetual swap funding, we're seeing these increases in the price of a lot of large cap cryptos, Bitcoin, ETH, Litecoin, Link, right? The largest coins rising over the past 24 hours. We're seeing that dip get bought back up. And to determine whether or not this is healthy, like I said, you want to look, are leverage traders buying this? Are we pumping this up on leverage, on derivatives, or is this actual spot buying and people stepping in, corporate treasuries or actual long-term investors stepping in to buy the dip, trying to understand what are people's risk tolerance here? Is there an actual appetite to push the market up higher? And what he pointed out, muted levels of perpetual swap funding, basically means that the funding didn't change for a lot of those derivatives in futures markets. And over the past 24 hours in this nice bounce we've seen for Bitcoin getting back above 50K, the funding has been muted, which basically signals that this has largely been spot buying. People like Michael Saylor and a lot of longer term investors actually do have the risk appetite to be adding Bitcoin here, right? And obviously other cryptos, large caps get bid up there as well. So that's a positive sign. Now that doesn't mean we can't fall, right? When I make the case that we're still in a bull market, that you can't rush to conclusions the bull market's over just because we have a 20% pullback or just because they're spot buying, right? It's important to note that 20 to 30% pullbacks are normal and they could still happen. We're never going to go straight up, but I do think that's a good sign. One thing though that you need to be watching out for as you're watching the positive news continue to roll out in March, right? Bitcoin at 50K, let's say we get to 60, 70. One thing that I think is so important to keep an eye on and that I want to make clear in this video that you can use is looking at the market's reaction to the news. And I think that that's much more important maybe than even the news is by itself. I'm going to explain what I mean by that because it's a little bit confusing and not so intuitive at first. Let's say a really positive piece of news comes out next week. Let's say Apple wants to buy Bitcoin for their corporate treasury, right? And Bitcoin explodes. I imagine it would. I don't expect this happens, but I'm giving you guys a hypothetical example. If another large company wants to add Bitcoin to their balance sheet, I'm sure Bitcoin would do very well. But let's say they say that, and then another two companies also announce they want to add Bitcoin to their treasury. If Bitcoin stops reacting positively to the positive news, then the market's expectation maybe got a little bit further ahead than what the news is actually telling us. Right, so the market's perception of what's happening is probably a little bit more important than the actual news headline. And that's what I'm watching out for in March as all this positive news comes out, as the dips continue to be bought. Let's say Bitcoin keeps going up, the bull market's not over. you have to be watching to see if the market's reaction and their perception gets a little bit out of whack with what's actually happening with Bitcoin. So I'm still bullish. I think the bull market goes on. I've laid out the case for that last week in last week's market update. So far, to start this week, things are looking good. Hopefully last week helped you not sell the dip and actually helped you get long on the dip. Bitcoin back above 50K. Big piece of news on Monday. That's the Michael Saylor Bitcoin buy. You have spot buying driving this, right? Just to kind of recap today's episode. And one thing to watch out for, as I said, is the market's reaction to the news coming out in March. And if we continue to react positively, that's a great sign. But if all of a sudden, right, big news is coming out and the moves are muted, then you have to maybe say, okay, are we getting too ahead of ourselves? Are we due for a pullback? That's one thing to keep in mind for March. And that is all we got for today's episode of the Profit Maximalist Show, keeping you in touch with what's happening in the crypto market, my bullish take on Bitcoin, but also one thing you need to do to maybe manage risk in March as Bitcoin keeps marching higher. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I have another one coming out later today looking at the ETH trade because ETH might be due for a major move. And I say that slightly laughing because I've been expecting ETH to start moving for quite some time and it is just lagging. But I have an episode coming out with a catalyst that could actually propel ETH higher. I'm obviously going to give the risks. I'll break down the chart. We'll have a look at things, but that's coming out. So make sure you subscribe to hear that. If you're watching this on YouTube, slap a like and let me know what you guys want to see next. I also have some really cool interviews coming out. One of my favorite analysts in the space is jumping on to talk about DeFi projects and decentralized exchanges. Some really heavy hitters coming out later this month as well. So a lot of good episodes in the way, more market updates on the way. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you on the next episode.